and welcome to River Reflections, a ministry outreach of River of Life Ministries in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I'm Jacob Menninga, the director of River of Life Ministries Media Club and your host for today's show. Now, ordinarily you'd see Rosemary's face right about here for the show, Pastor Rosemary Barnes, but today is a special show where we will be interviewing our pastor, Dr. Rosemary Barnes, and she is here in the studio with us. Say hello, Rosemary.
Hello, Rosemary.
How are you?
Hello, Jacob. I'm fine.
That's good. Now, we're going to deal with a topic today that not a lot of people have a lot of experience with or even have talked about a lot, and that's the topic of deliverance, namely deliverance from demons. And I talked to one of my friends about this interview that we were going to have, and when I told him what the topic was about deliverance from demons, he was just like, whoa, I've never even heard about it. And when I told him a little bit of what I know of your testimony, he said, I've never even, the closest I've even experienced something like that is just you telling me about that through her. So
wow.
So this is something that's going to be a good resource for folks out there who may not have heard a lot about deliverance before.
Back in the early 70s, a lot of us were reading books on this and ministering to one another.
Wow.
And that particular deliverance is so real, and it can get sticky because people don't know what all is going on,
right.
And people don't always walk in humility, so then they get a little frightened of things being exposed that they've
right.
been dealing with.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get free if you're trying to cover up everything.
Yeah,
you know,
that's right.
But we need to resurrect that ministry.
Yeah. So, well, let's start off just talking about some of the things. Now, we know that you have an extraordinary testimony of how you were delivered from numerous different demons. But just tell us, to start off, what was some of the early signs that indicated that you were having some trouble in that area?
I want to say first that the household that I was adopted into was a blessed Christian household. And I just want to make sure everybody understands that all the things I'm going to explain have nothing to do with anything my parents did wrong.
Right.
I want to make sure we make that clear. But as a child, I think the first time I consciously realized that there was something wrong inside is I can still feel myself standing in this particular part of the playground at Byron Center Christian School, watching everybody play and feeling like I was outside looking into a window and not a part of the other kids. And it was a feeling of rejection and even a feeling of how do you go from here to feeling as at home as they were looking as
right.
they played together. Then another manifestation for me was, and I write about a 10-year-old experience, but when I really want to be honest about it, already at 3 and 4 and 5, I was having crushes.
Wow.
I'd be in church just singling somebody out that I'd have a crush on for a long time. I remember when I was 5, it was a guy 14, and there was always some guy that I was really, really liking. And I never heard anybody else say they went through that, and I became very boy crazy. I mean, that's all gone now, obviously,
right.
But I'm just saying it was a real thing with me. And at 10, one problem was I looked like I was 14, 15 at 10. But there was a guy who went to Byron Center School. He was 16, I'm 10, and that school is on the way to walking on Byron Center Avenue
right.
to Byron Center Christian.
Yep.
And I used to just stand with him and talk and talk and talk, and there came a point that he kissed me, took me for a walk and kissed me, and it got to be enough traffic between us. The sheriff of our town, Ralph Gooman, literally came to our front door. I'm 10 years old, and informed my parents what was going on. He had been kind of watching and keeping tabs on me, and told them that was not appropriate and
right.
to talk to me about it.
That's good.
I remember at that age too, just at 10, just crying at the dinner table for no reason. Now I knew I was adopted, and it was about that age too that I began to long even though I love my parents, I began to long to know who I was. Who did I come from? And feel that sense of having been given away. There was just a lot of traffic going on that shouldn't be there in a little girl.
Right.
By the time I was 17, I hit you know, how many boyfriends later? Still pure, but lots of boyfriends, lots of affection even that shouldn't have been manifested. But at 17, in my senior year, then I got hit with depression. Didn't know what it was. Just again, I'm sitting in the choir room, still imagine myself sitting in Miss O's choir room, feeling like I was going to die, like I had no future, like everything was hopeless and sad.
Wow.
That was my first bout with depression. There were a few more after that. I need to add to that, back that 10-year-old Stan, I began to realize there were some people I was hating, repulsed by, hated.
Wow.
And I don't know why. I don't know how that came about, but I hated that I hated.
Right.
And I knew that was something. All that time I knew and loved Jesus, but things were happening in me that shouldn't have been.
Yeah, that's really interesting. What were some more of the nature of how later on those demons manifested themselves in a more strong way later on in your life?
Yeah, later on, by the time I was 19, up until then I had managed to stay free of messing up my first night of marriage, so to speak.
Right.
But at 19, all hell broke loose. At 19. In that year, I met my birth mother, and this wasn't her fault that it did, but it just was a real milestone year in a lot of ways.
Right.
I worked at juvenile court, and the staff there, some of the staff, not all the staff, but some of them partied hard. Lots of drunkenness, lots of marijuana, lots of promiscuity. I got involved with that, lots of drunkenness.
So a lot of the people that you were hanging out with helped to encourage that,
and give me the marijuana.
There.
I never bought marijuana, and I smoked it for years. Just give it to me, and not only helped with it, would introduce me to people because they knew I was, putting it euphemistically, affectionate. And so they, you know, come on, meet Rosemary. So I became Little Miss Party Girl.
Right.
And then at that same time, I got into the occult. Huge. We would okay, my birth mother, she didn't know any better. She took me to a fortune teller. And the spirit that, to make a long story short, the spirit that was communing with the fortune teller literally followed me home and appeared on the wall.
Whoa.
Literally. Encased in glowing red, person looking down at me.
Thanks.
And I read everything I could. Now, mind you, Jacob, during that year when I was 19, I think I'm talking 66 here. 19, yeah, 66. You go to the library and you found Edgar Cayce, Jean Dixon, Ruth Montgomery. I'm trying to think, were there many more occult arts books? Now, there's whole bookstores dedicated to this. If you go on the internet, it's full of it. It was something that came in between the marijuana, which became very prevalent among middle class kids, which I don't know that it was before that. You know, we used to call it like beatnik generation way back when, guys that were musicians. But to have it so prevalent among kids, it just became that way. And the occult, you know, playing the Ouija board, going to the, reading your astrology, that became real. And I was drawn to that like a moth to the flame.
Wow.
Just when I worked the Ouija board, that thing would go so fast that we'd have to put the letters down as it was doing it and then separate them into words and sentences afterwards. And they made perfect sense. It just was amazing how that worked. At the same time, that spirit of hatred that flared up when I was 10 went into a manifestation of prejudice towards white people.
Oh.
The reason being, during 66, it might have been the first riot if it wasn't 67, a lot of black militants began their rhetoric about the white man, the man. I listened. I listened to Malcolm X. I listened to H. Rap Brown and Stokely Carmichael, read Eldridge Cleaver's Soul on Ice, and you'd think I was black. I switched over into Ebonics. I got me a fro. I ran with the guys that started the riot, and it was like I took on a whole alternative personality from what I'd been raised with. I now realized I needed deliverance, but I didn't know that then. I mean, that was just flat out abnormal to hate white people, and you're white.
That is very
weird.
strange.
Very weird.
So what was then, with all that going on, what was the beginning of how you came to come towards the path toward deliverance and victory?
Okay, I moved right after I graduated from Calvin. I moved to San Francisco, got even more promiscuous, even more involved in dope. But the man I had been dating, you know, one of the guys that I said that his group, he spent time in jail for the riot, that whole group of guys, the man I had been dating after I was in San Francisco for several months and doing my little Haight-Ashbury bit, he called me one night and said, I'm in Phoenix, I'll be in San Francisco at night. And he came and he asked me to go back home with him and eventually to marry him.
Oh, wow.
And I did. And he's now walking with the Lord. But back then, he was still running with the same guys, smoking the same dope, as was I.
Right.
I wasn't a good little girl. And things got rough between us. And I'm not going to divulge too much of that because I'm so happy he's walking with the Lord now. And that would be his testimony. But things got very rough. Underline rough 60 times, between us, to the point that I began to think about suicide.
Wow.
And when I was thinking about killing myself, I began to ask the Lord for a Christian friend. Now, mind you, this whole time that I'm acting like I'm losing my cookies, I'm still praying. I'm still a believer.
Wow.
I'm in San Francisco acting like an idiot. I come home to my room at the Y Residence Club there on Powell. I get down on my knees and ask God to help me to be a better Christian.
Wow. So there was a serious disconnect between where you wanted to be
the
and
spirits
were
were almost like different personalities. I mean, they were different personalities inside that would be given opportunity to just completely express themselves. Anyway, so I come back home, I'm married, I'm miserable, I ask the Lord for a Christian friend. Well, before he gave me Loie Bergsma, that was the friend he gave me, and you know who she is.
Right.
She's in heaven now. But once before that, my husband and I had gone to a party where I was dancing with one of my supervisors, and my husband, felt I had gotten a little too close. Now, looking back, I had, but not as close as he thought I had.
Right.
You know, dancing. Okay. Well, that night, he did something very threatening. And we lived at the 900 block of Bates, near Bates and Eastern, in the ghetto at that time. And it was past midnight, snow, high snow. And all I could do is grab my coat. Period. We're talking barefoot running down Bates Street past midnight. I never told you this story, huh? And I flagged down. I'm in the ghetto. I just have a coat on. I flagged down the first car I see. It's after midnight. I could cry just thinking about the mercy of God.
Wow.
Because in that car was a couple who were closely related to, I think like brother-in-law, to a man named Pastor Galen Meyer, and his wife, we called her Sam. Her name's probably Samantha, but Galen and Sam. I don't know how. The first miracle is that I flagged down somebody that wasn't abusive.
Right.
The second miracle is I flagged somebody down that knew Galen and Sam. The third miracle is how in the world did I get from the road to a seat and start talking about Galen and Sam?
Right.
Galen was somebody, your dad went on summer workshops and mission as a teenager with the Christian Reformed Church. So did I. I went to Albuquerque. Galen was the seminarian who was our leader. That car took me to their home.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yes, on Madison. I just went past there yesterday and there's a for sale sign for the first time that I've ever seen it in front of their house right across from Garfield Park.
Do you think that all those connections may have been a result of your constant crying out to the Lord
yes,
over and over?
absolutely. I believe with all my heart He had His hand on me. To me, that is beyond doubt that it was a miracle. So I go to their house, and at that time, the rock opera, Jesus Christ, who are you? Who do you say you are?
Yeah.
Jesus Christ Superstar. And they were all excited because they had just bought that. It might have been an 8-track at that time, I don't know, or a record album. But they had just bought that. And that song, I'd been praying. I'd been asking God to I didn't know what demons were either. But I'd been asking God to help me because I saw no way out of my misery. And that song, which I'm sure the man who wrote it wasn't some spirit-filled Christian who was using it for evangelism, but that's how that song worked in my heart.
Yeah,
I stayed with him
God can use anything.
Yes, I stayed with him for a few days, and then I went back home again. But it wasn't long after that. I was a social worker at the time at social services with the welfare, and I made home calls, and I was on a lunch break at Rogers Plaza. And my old piano teacher, Ruth Camps from Byron Center, Michigan, saw me at Rogers, and she said, "You're the one God has me in here for."
Wow.
And I go, "What?" And, she said there's I think it was a Navigators Conference or something at the Sweden House across the street. Some of the people listening probably remember that restaurant. So I go there with her, called job, asked for some annual leave, went there with her. I sit right next to Loy Bergsma. She takes an immediate interest in me. I informed her I wasn't interested in her because she was white and I didn't particularly like white people.
Oh, but of course.
Yes, told her all about, I did, having said that, told her some of my problems I was having. I don't know what inspired me, well, I do know who inspired me to do that. A few days later, I was home from work, again, strongly considering suicide. And I was home because I was depressed. I was just sick with depression. And she called. And actually, her first burden was for my husband, my ex-husband.
Wow.
And she had called the piano teacher to find out my maiden name. To find out my maiden name, called my mother to get my number, and then called me.
Oh, wow.
And she at that time was hungry for the Lord. She had just read David Wilkerson's Cross and Switchblade.
Oh, yeah.
So she said, whatever it takes, I want what he's got. So she began to seek the baptism of the Holy Spirit, which actually resulted in Maranatha Church being formed in time. That's a long story, and that's her story, and she's in heaven, so ask her about it when you're there.
I will.
I might tell it sometime. But she and I both were hungry. So somewhere along the way, we read Don Basham's book, Deliver Us from Evil. And, there were so many things she helped me with, but we're talking about deliverance today. So I'll cut to that chase. I had not only met my birth mother by then, she finally told me who my birth father was. I went to visit him. I met him while he was in jail. And I was praying for him. You'd be amazed how much praying I was doing during all this acting like an idiot. You really would. How many people are out there that are like that? We just don't know them and don't know they need us.
Yeah.
But I was praying for him. His name is Arthur Hoyt. And one day he came to see me at work, and I got angry at him about something, and I said, GD, you go to hell.
Oh my.
Well, Loy had just told me I have a spirit of hatred. And I said, I do not. I got really angry with her for saying that.
Nice.
And as soon as I did that, because I knew I loved him and I cared about him, and that came up and out of me as if it were another being inside of me.
Oh, wow.
It was like I watched myself say that, and I was in horror that I would say that to him.
Wow. So that was a real wake-up call for you then?
Yes. So then I called them, and they set up an appointment for 4 hours. I mean, they didn't plan it for 4 hours. We just ended up being 4 hours. That was the first deliverance session. I had many more subsequent with that. But we fasted and prayed.
How long did you spend fasting before?
Maybe just 3 days.
Okay.
I did fast every now and then during that particular season in my life, just because things were really hellish in my life. They were really rough. But I fasted and prayed for that. We got in the barn. They didn't know what they were doing. They literally were trying to get their directions from the book they had just read. There's all kinds of scripture about the disciples and Jesus casting out demons.
Yeah.
But when somebody walks in the room and you're going to minister to deliverance to them, if you've never been around that sort of thing,
yeah, it's a whole...
you don't even know how to start. You know, like, hi, let's see, what do we do now? You know, I mean, I've learned since, but during those days, we were, you know, we were raw in the whole subject. But the first thing Cal and Lloyd did is they started to worship.
Yeah.
You know, you got that passage with Saul and David where when Saul would be troubled by an evil spirit, David would worship and that evil spirit left him. And worship means a lot when it comes to that. Then they started to share some word.
Good.
And then, after hours of just prayer, worship, word, with me not feeling anything, something began to rise up inside of me. It went right up from here to my throat.
Wow.
A literal presence being, and started to choke me.
Oh my.
Seriously, I'm not playing a little bit. Started to choke me from within, and in my head it said to me, somehow I knew it was the spirit of hatred. And it said to me, I have been your personality since you've been 10 years old.
Wow.
And if I actually leave you, you will not have a personality. That's what it said inside of my head to me.
Wow.
And I shared that with them, and they kept telling it, they addressed it by name then, and it came out.
Wow.
And I don't know that I mentioned that before it came out, again, this little girl I was praying and carrying on, I could not stop profanity. I hated white people, and I could not stop being profane in my words. I mean, gutter words. I'm not just talking about mild expletives. I'm talking about words that start with M and have an F somewhere in the middle of it.
Right.
And I'd go home at night and ask the Lord to help me stop saying those words.
Right.
And I'd go back to work and get disgusted with some welfare client that wasn't acting right, and I'd be done with talking to him on the phone and that, and just spiel forth things that again felt like they weren't even coming from me, they were coming from some other source. And after that spirit of hatred left, number one, I liked white people and black people and brown people and yellow people and red people and all people.
Nice.
It just completely lifted. That whole hatred, racial hatred towards white people was gone immediately when that spirit left. And I had no problem. You've never heard me say that naughty word ever, and you've known me all of your life.
Yep,
That's right. You've been in play situations with me, picnics and fun times and seminars and church, and you have never heard me say, nor do I want to say that. But before I got delivered from hatred, and the Lord showed me that saying words like that, it's like throwing mud pies in people's faces. It's a form of hostility and hatred.
Yeah, it hurts.
It's just like that. It's like, you know, and it was gone, totally gone. So that was
amazing.
So your question was, okay, here I was in this, and maybe next week we can talk more about the nature of some of the spirits
right.
that did eventually come up, and I can talk about. I actually I didn't become this perfect little person after that. I went through some more after this deliverance. Maybe 3 years later, I backslid again. Moved to California and backslid. Not, it was less than a year, but it was still bad.
Right.
And then I came back and needed more deliverance. The fact is, if we never hatred again, hatred left once and for all.
Okay.
Okay.
But still, it sounds like there was more.
Well, the things that I talked about had begun to, like the whole boy crazy thing, the whole, and I'll tell you next week, Robert actually cast that one out of me.
Oh, wow.
And I'll tell you later about that one.
Tell us who Robert is real quick.
Robert is my present, lovely, wonderful, saved, spirit-filled husband with whom I've been married over 36 years, and we've had a church together for over 33.
Wow.
And God was just so, I should probably tell the people this part too. When I was at juvie as a group worker, one of my supervisors, I will not name who, although the 7-year expiration date has come and gone a few times, the one where there's a statute of limitations,
right,
so that nobody's going to charge me with B&E or him. But one night during the 11/7 shift, him and I went into the records because I wanted to find out who my birth parents are. That's how I found out. I'm getting to say what's on that record, another miracle. On that record, my grandma's name was Rose. My mother's name was Mary. My father, who has run with gangs and had a gang and was known for, in fact, when he died, Blackie Hoyt dies, one of Grand Rapids' most notorious criminals kind of thing. He, by the way, was a pastor's son. And when he was in jail, usually acted right, so hopefully he's in heaven because he died at Jackson. But anyway, because he was kicked out of Kent County at that time, my birth mother created a name for him rather than get him in trouble. And the name she created was Robert Church. Eventually I married Robert and we started a church. My grandma's name being Rose and my mother's name being Mary was another miracle, because when the doctor, she had me for 10 days in an apartment, and the Dr. Bruce came and got me. They both had the same doctor, my adopted parents and my birth mom, and brought me to my adopted parents' house. My sister was 2.5. She had a doll named Rosemary. She said to my mom, "Now you've got a Rosemary and I got a Rosemary."
Wow.
So the name stuck, but it was God's name for me.
It was totally independent.
You got Grandma Rose, Mom Mary, and they had no idea.
That's amazing.
So even that is to me like God's fingerprints, even though that was the height of the time when I found out. I was 19. I was acting nuts. I didn't really get it all until later.
Yeah, that's really amazing how even from the beginning we can see that God's hand was on your life, and even through all the prayer that you had, He was able to work and bring you to where you needed to be to get the deliverance that you needed. And it's all been worth it because you've been doing all kinds of stuff here. You've got your church here. You've been ministering all over the world. And in our next show, we'll talk more about how you were delivered from some other things. Thanks for watching.
Yes.